I'm excited to hear some of these stories.
I'll turn the floor over to you. You go ahead. I already talked enough.
All right. So I'll tell a kind of a personal story about the first deer that I ever shot, which I've got mounted on the wall back here behind me. But everybody remembers their first animal, their first deer. Like I said, I when I was 12, I had that opportunity at that small bowl, and yeah, I couldn't. It wasn't that I couldn't get myself to shoot it. It was with a cow, and they were separate, and I was afraid I was going to screw up. It was low light, just getting light. I was afraid I was going to screw up and shoot the cow and disappoint dad or whatever. So I ended up not doing anything and just let it walk off. And what's funny is Joe will tell you I'm usually the guy that you know you want to enjoy the moment, take your time. And I've never been that guy. I usually the first animal I see on opening day, I shoot. And last year, it was last year. Last year, I had an opportunity, a small buck on opening day, and Joe talked me out of it, and I ended up going home empty-handed. Um,
Joe, how could you, man?
yeah, but but my first deer, it was the fall of 2001, and I was a junior in high school at the time, and the day before was opening day. Dad and I went up to a ridge outside of town. It took us about 2.5 hours to get there, and we'd been up in this area before, and it was actually the same area where when I was 12, I had an opportunity at that bowl. It was the same mountain, same area,
Mm,
and we went up there and we hunted all day and saw a few does, and towards the end of the day we did see one decent 3x3 blacktail, and I ended up not getting an opportunity at him. Chased him around for a little bit, never had a chance. And this was rifle season, and so I begged when I got home that day. I begged. That was on a Saturday. I begged to go out the next day on Sunday, and I had never hunted without Dad before, ever. And I was nervous to go without him, not because I was afraid I wasn't capable or getting lost or anything like that. I mean, I was 17, and I'd been hunting every single year since I was 12 with Dad carrying a gun, and I
yeah.
felt really good about it. But I'm kind of a sentimental guy. I kind of have a soft heart for stuff, and I was afraid that I was going to go out and I was going to shoot my first deer without Dad. And so part of me second guessed going up there, but I really really wanted to go, and he couldn't go because they had a charity breakfast, pancake cooked breakfast, that he and my mom were helping put on the next day.
Okay.
And so I finally convinced him to let me go up there. Dad had and I've got it now, but Dad had a 74 Chevy pickup that he let me have and drive up there for the day. And so I drove it up there with a buddy of mine, and we went up there, went to the exact same spot, got there in the dark, hiked up the ridge. I couldn't, everything looks different in the dark, and I couldn't find exactly where I wanted to be. So I kind of sat down and just parked it until it started to get light. My buddy had kind of peeled off up the ridge the other direction. So I was sitting there, waited till it got light a little bit. And in that those first hours of the daylight, your eyes kind of play tricks on you. So I just sat there for a little longer than I probably needed to, but I worked my way up the ridge after it got light and found a huge stump and sat right underneath that stump. And my whole plan is I knew that we'd seen deer in the area, we'd seen elk move through there, and so I thought I'm going to sit here for a little while. So so I sat there for, I don't know, 2.5 hours probably, and finally I decided, okay, I was going to work my way up the rest of the ridge, crest it, and then work my way back up and just see what I could stumble across. And I got up and I stood. I don't know why I did it, but I crawled up on top of that stump. And this was a pretty tall, big tree that had been fell. And I stood up on top of that stump just for a few minutes because, I mean, everybody knows that spends any time sitting in the woods. When you get up
Yeah.
and start moving, it feels like you disrupt everything. Everything sounds extremely loud. So I stood up. I don't know why, but I climbed up on this stump and I just stood there for a few minutes. And I bet I wasn't standing there for 3 minutes. And this forked horn steps out, and he's about 50 yards away from me, kind of quartered walking towards me. So instantly, obviously, I can feel a lump in my throat and I can't breathe and I'm all excited. And I decide, okay, I'm gonna shoot this fork. And about the time that I pulled up the rifle, about the time I found him in my scope, I noticed another deer behind him, and I noticed it was a much bigger buck. So I swung over to him. He stopped broadside. And I mean, I don't even remember. I feel like I just put my gun where I thought it needed to go. And I remember reminding myself, squeeze the trigger, squeeze the trigger, squeeze the trigger, which is exactly what I did not do.
Oh.
As soon as the crosshairs went where it was supposed to go, I just was like, no, you got to get a round off. I just remember thinking, get a round off. And that was, the dumbest thing in the world, because Dad had taught me better than that. I felt like I was pretty good at the range, but I was so excited. I just jerked the trigger and shot, and
Yeah.
instantly the deer dropped. And I jumped off. It wasn't 2 seconds. I didn't wait. I didn't do anything. I jumped off the stump. I yelled. I just gave a big holler, and I started running up the hill to him. And I was probably, I don't know, at this point, he was probably 40 yards away from me. I was probably 20 yards, maybe halfway to him, and he stood back up. And at that point, I
Oh,
froze, and I didn't know.
no.
I was like, what just happened? So I put another round in. I was shooting a Winchester Model 70. I put another round in, and I shot, and he fell again, and then he's kicking. So I put another round in, and I shot again, and then I just sat there, and I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to approach him. I was afraid to do anything. And so at this point, I don't feel like I can see. I've got total tunnel vision. But after he stopped kicking, I slowly walked up to him and got up there, and I couldn't figure out. I was looking at him, and one of my second follow-up shot, I believe, missed him. I don't know. Uh,
Okay.
and I could only find, when I first was looking at him, I was trying to figure out where I hit him, and I could only find where one entry went in. And then when I grabbed his head and moved his head right at the main fork, and I'm looking at him now, right at the main fork, he was a 4x3, and on his left side, where the main fork on the blacktail is, on the 3-point side, there was a perfect bullet hole going straight through that main fork on right at the main beam. And so that first round, what I think happened is that, and looking at the angle that the round went through, it had to have been my first shot. And so
Yeah.
my first shot hit him right in that web of that antler, and I think it just knocked him over and stunned him. And then
Yeah.
obviously, as I was running towards him, he came to and stood up and shot him again. But I just couldn't believe it. And when I took the deer to a taxidermist later, he told me, he said, I can fix that for you. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, leave that. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's, part of that story. But
That's amazing. So it didn't break the antler. It just went
no.
straight through.
It went straight. I mean, if that round would have hit any direction, up, down, left, right, it would have broke it off. But it hit right in that web. I mean, it's almost center punched right through there, perfect. And
That's so cool.
I mean, it's still strong, and I mean, it didn't break off or anything. But I stood over him, and then I thought, well, now what the hell am I going to do? And eventually, about, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour later, my buddy that I'd went there with, I heard him start walking up the ridge to me, and I told him, I called him. I said, Kyle, I said, get over here. I said, check out this 4x3. And he just called me out. He said, bullshit. He goes, it's a little forky. And when he got up there, I said, no, I said, it's a good one. And then we drug it down the hill and got it to the truck, cleaned it up, got it to the truck. And then I was so excited to get back down into town to show Dad. My buddy wanted to stay up there and hunt a little bit, but I was like, no, we're leaving. We're done. So we drove down the hill, and then I got I went to my house and asked my brother where my parents were, and they were at a local church putting on this pancake breakfast. And I instantly drove the truck down to there. It was only about 5 minutes from the house. And I mean, I don't know, I must have looked like a scene from whatever horror movie, because I had blood all over me. It was the most inefficient gutting job in the world, because it was the first year I'd ever done this on. And I busted into that pancake breakfast. That church hall was just lined with people eating. And the first thing I did is I saw my mom, and I went up to her and I said, where's Dad? And she just looked me up and down, and she said, he's over there. And so she led me to where he was. I went over to him, and I was like, Dad, I got one. And part of me felt a little bit of guilt, that he wasn't.
Yeah.
But I went up to him, and he's like asking me questions about it. He's like, we got to get out of here. Like, we can't, you're covered in blood, and all these people are eating breakfast. So we went back to the house.
Oh, that's a great visual, man.